Hello and welcome to The World This Week with Alicia Edwards, a look back at some of the biggest global news stories for an international city, brought to you by the London Live news team. Protests in the US following the leak of a US Supreme Court document detailing plans to overturn the landmark ruling which protects the constitutional right to have an abortion. Also in the US, the aftermath of a tornado in Kansas as many lose their homes. And more extreme weather, the most rainfall ever recorded in a day, leaves the streets of Valencia underwater. That's all on the way before 7:30, but first to Ukraine, where this week hundreds of civilians were evacuated from the ruined Ukrainian port city of Mariopol and the surrounding areas. It came as Russian forces on Tuesday resumed shelling the Azovstal steel plant after a number of people managed to escape. Ukrainian fighters say that Russian forces began storming the facility, which includes a number of underground tunnels and bunkers where many have been trapped for 2 months. Close to 100 people managed to leave the steelworks, according to the UN Humanitarian Coordinator for Ukraine, but many remain inside, with conditions understood to be unlivable with little access to food, water or basic necessities. President Zelensky has asked the UN chief to help evacuate the wounded still at the plant. Meanwhile, Russia's offensive in the east of Ukraine is continuing in the hope to gain control of Donetsk and Luhansk. This week, an oil depot near Donetsk caught fire after shelling. 1 person was killed and 2 wounded in what was thought to be a Ukrainian shelling of an oil depot in the city of Makivka. 4 5,000-ton oil tanks caught fire after the attack. Footage captured by the Associated Press showed firefighters and other emergency services attempting to extinguish the fire at the depot. The agency is working in Makivka as part of a press facility organised by the separatist leadership of Donetsk, and say they cannot independently verify the claims of Ukrainian shelling made by separatist authorities. They say that getting a full picture of the unfolding battle in the east has been difficult because airstrikes and artillery barrages have made it extremely dangerous for reporters to move around. In a first-of-its-kind agreement between Japan and a European country this week, Boris Johnson promised to work with other countries after signing a defensive partnership with Japan. The Prime Minister met Japanese PM Fumio Kishida in Downing Street, where the two nations also announced plans to work together for disaster relief. Both leaders condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It comes as the UK has announced further funding to help vulnerable groups within Ukraine and at its borders. A £45 million package will go to UN agencies and charities working to support those most vulnerable to abuse and harm. The latest funding brings the UK's aid package for Ukraine to £220 million. Well, former boxer Vladimir Klitschko this week praised Boris Johnson for his support for Ukraine.
I'm really impressed with Boris Johnson's statements and as well as Great Britain acting on support of Ukraine and just being such great ally and acting as fast as possible. And that's great. And I just want to use this moment and say thank you to Great Britain, and in this case, Boris Johnson, with all the support that you guys are providing for us in Ukraine.
Former boxer Vladimir Klitschko there. Now, one Ukrainian journalist who has been fact-checking Russia's reporting of the war says the information space the people of Russia are used to can't be compared with Western media. Part of her fight against disinformation includes verifying the mass of photographs and videos being uploaded and shared online, as many have been proved to have been manipulated or to be spreading incorrect information.
People have this belief that only the Russian propaganda media are telling them the right thing, and all the rest are against Russia, and all the other media are just coming up with some fairy tales about non-existent war in Ukraine. It sounds ridiculous in some way and maybe surreal to think that someone who has access to internet, who can check all the news from various sources, can still believe this propaganda. But in fact, we shouldn't forget that the circumstances and the conditions under which Russians have been living, the information space where they've been growing up is very different from the one in the West. So after living for 20 years in under propaganda, without having proper access to independent journalism, freedom of speech, people tend to think that Russian government is telling the truth. It's very hard to persuade someone and to make them believe that the war is happening after they were exposed to propaganda for so many years.
Valeria Kovtun there. Now let's head to the US next, where protests have erupted this week following the leak of a US Supreme Court document which details provisional plans to overturn Roe versus Wade, the landmark ruling which protects the constitutional right to have an abortion. According to a 98-page draft majority opinion published by Politico, there are plans to overturn the case, as well as a 1992 decision which maintained the right to have an abortion. The US Supreme Court has confirmed that the leaked document is authentic, but said it is not a final decision. If it is overturned this summer, 13 states will trigger laws which would immediately make abortion illegal, and a number of others are likely to pass laws quickly. If this were to happen, abortion could become illegal in nearly half of all US states. And according to healthcare organisation Planned Parenthood, 36 million women could lose access to abortions. US President Joe Biden has condemned the idea.
You know, if this decision holds, it's really quite a radical decision. And again, the underlying premise, and again, I've not had a chance to thoroughly go into the report, the decision. But it basically says all the decisions related to your private life, who you marry, whether or not you decide to conceive a child or not, whether or not you can have an abortion, a range of other decisions, whether or not how you raise your child. What does this do? Does this mean that in Florida they can decide they're going to pass a law saying that same-sex marriage is not permissible? It's against the law in Florida. So there's a whole, it's a fundamental shift in American jurisprudence.
US President Joe Biden there. Well, the court is expected to rule on the case before its term is up in either late June or early July. Staying in the US now for just a moment to Kansas, and a tornado which damaged more than 1,000 buildings in south-central Kansas generated winds up to 165 miles per hour and carved a path of destruction nearly 13 miles long. The National Weather Service said the tornado caused extensive damage and injured several people. As many as 400 buildings were destroyed by the storm and more than 1,000 buildings were damaged. The Weather Service said the tornado was on the ground for 21 minutes. 4 people and 2 firefighters who were responding to a call in Andover were injured during the storm, but their injuries were minor. Janelle Farney's home is one of those which has been destroyed.
You see it on TV, but you think, you know, until you're standing here in person thinking, this was my home. You know, it's different. It's hard to kind of wrap your head around all that, you know.
Pictures there from Kansas. Also this week, the World Health Organization now estimates the COVID pandemic has caused the death of nearly 15 million people around the world. That is 13% more deaths than normally expected over 2 years. The WHO believes many countries undercounted the numbers who died from COVID. Only 5.4 million were reported. In India, there were 4.7 million COVID deaths, it said, which is 10 times the official figures and almost a third of COVID deaths globally. The Indian government has questioned the estimate, saying it has concerns about the methodology used to get to this figure, but other studies have come to similar conclusions about the scale of deaths in the country. Now, in a blue bay that spans the border of Haiti and the Dominican Republic, fishermen from both countries recently aired their grievances in a rare face-to-face meeting, thanks to the efforts of marine biologist John Wiener. The meeting, which was overseen by Dominican naval officers with rifles, was no small feat for Wiener, who's been forced to work on conserving the region from his house in the US because of violence in Haiti, where he was born. Now, the prize-winning biologist stood in the ominously named spot called the Massacre River, trying to bring the two sides together and find a solution that will not only save their livelihoods, but also vital marine resources in the region, which is under extreme pressures from climate change. A big part of the two sides' discussion was over the exact location of the border above Hispaniola, the name of the island shared by Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Out of the meeting came the idea of creating a boat registration and a licensing for fisheries so Haitian and Dominican authorities know who's in the water and where they're going. Standing on the sand, John Wiener gave a brief lesson on how to use a snorkel. He said it's important to get people out there and learn about the environment.
We really know that there's a part, where you can be in a classroom, but it is critically important that people actually get out and touch and see and feel the environment and see what they're actually studying in the classroom. That's critically important.
John Wiener there. Now, the world this week continues after the break. We'll be taking you to Hong Kong, where scientists have developed robot slime designed to help medics. More on the way in the next 10 minutes. Hello there, welcome back. You're watching The World This Week from the London Live News team, a review of the main international stories that have broken over the last 7 days. Still to come before 7:30. The looks which had the fashion world talking this week as the annual Met Gala took place in New York. But first, millions of people in the UK went to the polls for the local elections this week. In London, there were historic gains for Labour. The party took control of Barnet, Wandsworth and Westminster councils from the Conservative Party. Wandsworth had been a Tory stronghold for 44 years, while Barnet and Westminster had never been held by Labour. Sadiq Khan said that history has been made with the victory in Wandsworth. The London mayor was there to see the win in his own borough. And Sir Keir Starmer was in Barnet, already looking ahead to the general election.
This is a massive turning point for the Labour Party. From the depths of 2019, we're back on track now for the general election, showing what the change that we've done, the hard change we've done in the last 2 years, what a difference it has made. And, Cumberland, very important win last night in key constituencies for the next general election. Same in Southampton.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer there. And in other news from Westminster this week, Neil Parish formally resigned after admitting to watching pornography in the Commons. The Conservative MP told the BBC that the first time he watched pornography in the Commons was an accident, claiming he had been looking for photographs of tractors. But he admitted the second occasion was intentional. The former MP, who chaired the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee, was the MP for Tiverton and Honiton. There will now be a by-election. Well, just as people went to the polls this week, the Bank of England hiked interest rates to 1% as it warned the economy will go into reverse and that inflation will peak at more than 10% as the war in Ukraine compounds a crippling cost of living crisis. Members of the bank's 9-strong Monetary Policy Committee voted 6-3 to increase rates from 0.75% to 1%, the fourth time they have voted for a rise in a row and taking rates to a level not seen since 2009.
Global inflationary pressures have intensified sharply in the build-up to and following the invasion. This has led to a material deterioration in the outlook for world growth. Concerns about further supply chain disruption have also risen. both due to the invasion and to COVID developments, particularly in China. These developments have exacerbated greatly the challenges already facing the UK and many other economies from the series of adverse supply shocks that we continue to face. Monetary policy, therefore, must navigate a narrow path between the increased risks from elevated inflation and a tight labour market on one hand, and the further hit to activity from the reduction in real incomes on the other.
Right, on to some other stories now. We head to Valencia in eastern Spain, where this was the scene earlier this week, when streets were left submerged after the region recorded its heaviest ever rainfall in the space of 24 hours. This footage, shared by Valencia's fire service, showed rescue workers evacuating citizens as some vehicles were trapped in floodwater. Local police reported they received 94 emergency calls overnight from Tuesday into Wednesday, while the fire service responded to 50 call-outs. More than 201 litres of rain per square metre fell in a 24-hour period, making it the highest figure for May since records began in the 19th century. Right, to Hong Kong now, where researchers are developing a robot made of slime, which they say may one day help surgeons access hard-to-reach areas of our bodies. They call this black slimy substance a soft robot, and they hope that one day it can go inside the human body and be controlled with magnetic force. At the moment, the substance used is toxic to humans. The researchers say that perhaps in the future the slime could help with surgery, delivery of drugs and collect objects which have been accidentally swallowed. Here we see it navigating narrow and winding passages and moving objects when it's manipulated by magnets. Professor Li Zhang leads a team of researchers at the Medical Robotics Center of the Chinese University of Hong Kong, where it's being developed.
At the very beginning, the student saw some interesting video in the internet, kids play with a slime, which you can buy from the market. Then we start to think, if we add some magnetic material into the slime, then how much we can do the remote control, and whether we can use it, as a remotely actuated robotic hand, in the human body or not. Yeah, so this is the beginning of the research. It was purely curiosity driven. We are only thinking of using the slime robots inside the body for hours. Something like you swallow it, then it will do some job, do some task. For example, it may grasp the battery or some sharp object in your stomach, in your small intestine. Then afterwards, it can be executed from your body directly. Although we call it robots, slime robot, but currently there's no autonomous control, there's no autonomous motion, and there's no intelligence either. So we need to think about, how to realize, those functions and, whether we can provide some intelligence, to the robot. That means when, the robot is deployed in your body, it can judge, can make a decision by itself in certain situation, or maybe under the supervision of a surgeon.
It's a very clever work going on in Hong Kong, and Professor Li Zhang there. The slime robot is still under development, but if they can overcome the problem of toxicity, it could be of great use to the medical world. Right, back in the UK for a moment, where the recently rediscovered chained Bible found at Leeds City Library will soon be available to view by the public. The tiny Bible, which is no bigger than a £1 coin, was rediscovered during the COVID lockdowns. The 1911 replica contains both testaments printed on thin paper pages, which can only be read with a magnifying glass. Rhianne Isaac, a special collections senior librarian at the library, said the book was billed as the smallest Bible in the world when it was printed, although this was almost certainly not true. Its origins remain a mystery, as it only resurfaced when library staff decided to do a full survey during COVID lockdowns. Librarians say they're hoping the tiny Bible will be cherished by all visitors and not just academics and researchers. Right, to New York now, where earlier this week some of the world's biggest stars came together for the annual Met Gala, an event affectionately referred to as fashion's biggest night out. Every year there's a theme, and this year was no different, with celebs giving their best gilded glamour looks. Blake Lively's dress proved a hit with fashion commentators as it transformed into a different look on the red carpet. The Gossip Girl star said it was inspired by the Statue of Liberty and the architecture of New York. Another look which had everyone talking this week was worn by Kim Kardashian. For just minutes on the red carpet before swapping into a replica, Kim wore one of Marilyn Monroe's most iconic dresses, the beaded gown she wore to sing Happy Birthday to US President John F. Kennedy 60 years ago. The reality star dyed her hair blonde and reportedly lost 16 pounds to fit into the dress, which is usually on show in a museum in Florida.
It was one of the last public appearances for Marilyn Monroe before she sadly passed away. So this dress speaks to history, politics, the Kennedys, Monroe, it's Hollywood, it's fashion, and there's tragedy, all wrapped up into one piece of souffle gauze with 2,500 crystals hand-stitched onto the garment.
There we are, that dress worn by Kim Kardashian at the Met Gala earlier this week. Now, finally this morning, a light festival featuring 29 large-scale installations about water is illuminating a town in the Alps in northern Italy. It sees artists create immersive light installations at various water features around the old town, providing illuminating insights into the world of water.
The water has a crucial importance in Brixen. Brixen was founded here because the water was already here. We have 2 rivers, we have 22 fountains in the historical city center. We have the Plose water from the mountain. That gives us a very importance, and that gives the water theme the importance for our festival.
There we are, that festival runs until the 22nd of May there in the Italian Alps. And that's all from the world this week with Alicia Edwards. We'll see you at 7 next Saturday as we round up the biggest international stories for a global city.